Hello, beautiful Golden Anchor quilting community. I'm Louisa Grindle. I own Golden Anchor Quilting located here in Claremont, New Hampshire with my husband, Darren Grindle, our long arm quilter, and our team of ambassadors that keep us running smoothly and beautifully. We are so thankful for the time that you're spending here with us today. We're gonna make a jar opener with some scrap fabrics, some Orphan blocks, some things left over from other projects, and a little bit of shelf liner. And last week when we posted our tutorial pre-recorded, there were lots of comments about what was behind me. So I'm going to start off tonight by letting you know what's behind me so that folks know what to look for on our site. This is a quilt made in the Wings and Wind pattern, and it's made from the line Orphan. And we have the jelly rolls that make the center here. We have this green to make the applique birds and the border, and then we have this border print here at the shop and on our website. So the line is called Orphan, and if this inspires you, check out the website or give us a call at the shop. We'd be happy to ship it out to you. Let's dive right into our tutorial. I've got Izzy on cameras tonight. Thank you so much, Izzy, for spending time with your mother. I appreciate it. I know. I'm not such a torturous mother to spend time with. So we're going to go to the overhead camera here and look at the materials. When I was getting ready to make this tutorial, I didn't want to cut up a whole bunch of new fabrics. I wanted to use something that was already kind of sitting around and not having a life of its own. And I found this stack of triangles that had been cut off of half square triangles that had been made, or snowballs, in another quilt project. And they were tucked in a drawer, and I pulled them out and I started piecing them together, and they're not perfectly square because this is the trim off of something else. But I can square them up and work with that. I was thinking this would also be good for Orphan blocks, or you could make these really scrappy. You have so many choices. Or you could just use solid pieces of fabric if you didn't want to piece the side of your jar opener. I forgot to bring the sample in to show you the finished product that we're aiming for, but that's okay. We'll just make it together and then you'll get to see in the end what it looks like. So I started with about 6 inches square, 5.5 of fabric, 6 inches of the shelf liner, and another 6 inches of scrap batting. So 2 squares of fabric, 2 squares that are about the same size, and then your squares a little bit bigger of your shelf liner and your scrap batting. And that's really all you need for materials. For supplies, you're going to need a turning tool, chopsticks, knitting needles, crochet hooks, those all work too, a ruler to cut your squares, and some scrap batting. We already talked about that. A rotary cutter, let's see, scissors, and a sewing machine, and thread, and an iron. I'm not ADHD talking. I'm just talking faster than my mouth is working. Brain? I don't know. There's some sort of disconnect going on. Talking, Mom. All right. We're good. Let's get started. So, all I did was take some of these scraps and sew them together on their long side to start making a square. And I'm going to show you this, even though I've got these made, because there are a couple little tricks that I use when I'm doing things like this with Scrappy sewing. So we're going to come over here. And I am sewing on a Janome 2212 tonight, which is another machine that we do have available for sale in the shop. Last week we shared a Kenmore model 148, an older machine. This is definitely a newer machine, very basic machine, dial stitch selectors, has a little reverse button, basic but good. And this one will be here available for sale in the shop as well. With machines like this that don't grab your thread for you, you need to remember to hold your threads as you get started, or when you make your first stitch, it'll pull the thread back up and unthread your needle and cause frustration. There are a couple of ways to do that. One is to just remember to grab your thread and then get started. And you do a couple of stitches and then back stitch to tack and then forward again. And you want to make sure if you're sewing on the bias of fabric, which is what I'm doing right now, that you don't pull forward or pull at the back to help the fabric come through, because you'll create shifts in the bias in the fabric and really skew your square off. Even though I'm using scraps right now, I don't want to skew it and make it, you know, really crooked. So when I do that, an end, I want to bring my flywheel towards me again and then wait until it's not resisting me to pull those threads away from the machine to cut and give myself a nice little tail, leave a tail there. And the other way to do this, if you don't want to have to remember to grab your threads every time, is to work with what we call leaders or enders. So I'm going to show you that technique now. Just an extra little tip built in that doesn't really have to do with the tutorial, more about your sewing. So I'm going to grab another 2 of these out of the stack and line them up so that they're ready for my sewing. But before I sew that, I'm going to stick a little tiny piece of scrap under and grab my threads and get myself started on that fabric. And then chain piecing is a method where you leave the thread attached there, lift your presser foot, and put in what you want to start sewing. So what I just sewed on my leader, I'm going to tuck out of the way, get the fabric I want to sew for my project right now, and then get started on it, do my little back stitch, and then stitch all the way across. And when I get to the other side, I'm going to stitch to the end, back stitch a little, and not cut my thread. Grab another little leader ender, just a little piece of scrap, lift my presser foot, tuck this in, have a couple of stitches in between like chain piecing, and I'm going to stop sewing with my needle down in that leader, in that little leader. And I'm going to get it far enough out so that I can cut my thread right here in between my leader and my sewing project. But then when I get started on my next set of triangles, I don't have to remember to grab my thread. I can just get these in there, stitch to the end of it, 1 or 2 stitches off the end, tuck in what I'm getting ready to sew, and this leader is going to hold my threads for me so that I don't have to. And then I do my little back stitch, sew across. Wow, that's a really straight seam, Louisa. Good job. No worries, no worries. And then when I get to the end, I can take the first leader that I used and stitch across that. Couple stitches in between, stop in the middle of that, cut back here, and I'm ready for my next sewing step. So that's the way to use leaders and enders in machines that don't necessarily grab the thread for you and you don't want to have to pull a whole bunch in between each thing that you're sewing. So once you've got either your scraps or your Orphan blocks, whatever you're going to use to make the fabric part of your jar opener sewn together and pressed and ready, I think we can go to overhead for this part. You're going to make a sandwich and you're going to put the right sides of the fabric in opposite directions, and on whatever side you are okay putting behind your shelf liner. So this might just be a solid piece of something. It doesn't have to be pretty because it's not going to really show through the shelf liner, but it's, you know, going to be back there so that it's not just batting behind the shelf liner. So you've got one fabric right side up and then your shelf liner, the other fabric right side down, and then your scrap batting. Now you notice that I've got fabric on the outside here and batting on the outside here, and the only place that I can really see my fabric is on this shelf liner side. So on that shelf liner side, I'm going to make sure that my fabric squares line up pretty well underneath that so that when I'm sewing around the outside, I end up with something that's going to line up and turn for me. And if you've ever made coasters, this process is similar. If you left the shelf liner on the outside while sewing this, there's another technique you need to use, which we're going to look at when we top stitch this after we turn. But for now, your presser foot isn't going to touch the shelf liner, so it's going to be okay. I don't want to use a leader on this one, so I'm going to pull my thread through just a little bit so that my leader just dangles. And I'm going to start midway through. Now, if your machine's not a real rugged sewer, you may want to use a walking foot for this part because you've got a pretty thick sandwich between the batting, 2 layers of fabric, and the shelf liner. And when you're going to start maybe 1.5 inches from the edge of your square, maybe a little farther, inch from the edge of your square. And because I have that leader back there, I'm going to use that to hold my threads. Get started. And back stitch to secure that where the opening is going to be. Get near the corner. Leave my needle down. Rotate 90 degrees. Stitch across. And we're going to go almost all the way around. Not quite. And again, lift, turn. All the way down this side. Needle down. When you're leaving your needle down or up manually on a machine like this that doesn't have an automatic needle up or needle down, you always want to make sure you're turning your flywheel towards you to get that needle into the position you want it in, rather than away from you, because away from you pulls the thread reverse through the thread path, and that can cause problems like what we talked about when we said when you're changing thread, cut up here, don't pull from up there. So always turn that flywheel towards you when you're adjusting it manually. And on the last side, when you come around the corner, you're just going to stitch in a little bit and then back stitch to secure the opening. And then cut. Okay. And then you're ready to do a little bit of trimming. So you can do this with a rotary cutter or scissors. Are we on overhead, sweetheart? Perfect. She's so fast. I don't even know that she's done these things. All right, so you may be familiar with the concept of clipping your corners, right? Clipping off the bulk there. There's also a method of clipping corners that involves almost a little bit of a wing here, a curved cut like that, that decreases bulk when it's extra bulky, like this is going to be. So we're going to use both methods. We're going to clip diagonally across, but we're also going to kind of arch it in like a little wing and then back out. And we're going to trim. But here, where our opening is, I'm going to leave some extra. I'm not going to clip that because it makes it way easier to turn and tuck those edges in on this bulky thing when we go to turn and top stitch. Izzy, while I am getting this trimmed and ready for top stitching, would you be willing to go into the classroom and into my backpack and get tissue paper? Because that's our trick for sewing on shelf liner that I forgot to bring in with me. Okay, so on the three sides that don't have an opening, we're going to trim just to the edge of the fabric there, trim off all the extra bulk. But on the one side that does have the opening, you can see I've left all of this here to help with the turning moment. Thank you. Perfect. Tissue paper. Doesn't make sense now, but it will in a minute. Okay. If you wanted your jar opener to be quilted to the batting, you could pre-quilt it before you attach it in the layers in your sandwich. I decided that wasn't necessary, so I didn't do it this time, but you could. You could do embroidery on that before you put it into your jar opener. You really could go as fancy as you want to go. But we're going to turn through that opening. This is the part that's all grace and elegance. And when you're turning this, you want to turn it so that fabric attached to batting goes to one side and the shelf liner attached to fabric goes to the other side. And then you get your turning tool in there and poke out your corners. Oh, we have so much fun going on at the shop this week. What do we have going on? We have our, no, that's next week. Just kidding. We have lots of fun next week going on. We have our binding party on Tuesday the 18th. We have our 2 kit prepping days for our Quilts of Valor retreat on the 19th and 22nd. On the 21st, in between those, we have our Prairie Point Table Runner class. It's going to be super fun with Lynn Legacy teaching. And on Thursdays, we have Open Sew. So every Thursday is Open Sew. Anytime you want to come down and sew in a social setting and work on a project of your choice with other people around, come join us for that. Today, our all-inclusive Learn to Quilt folks finished their quilt tops. Well, some of them did. Weather stopped a few of them from getting in, but they will be in this week to finish their tops. And as soon as we've got all 7 tops completed, we'll put out either a video or a reel on Facebook so that our community can celebrate what these people have accomplished in their 6-week class. So now I've got it turned. I've got the corners poked out. And I have this shelf liner here, which is going to be a wonderful sticky jar opener. That is not a wonderful surface to sew on. That is a terrible surface to sew on, because as you try to push it through in this direction, it's going to catch on the machine. And if you try to push it through in this direction, it's going to catch on your presser foot. So at this moment, here's my little household tool trick. You get a piece of paper, tissue paper, super fine and, you know, not thick. You don't want to be using cardstock for this moment. And you get it a little bit bigger than the piece that you're sewing on. We actually used this trick this week in our Couch Caddy class for 12 months of gifts. And that class will repeat at the end of the month on Tuesday. I think it's the 25th, I think it is. I think it's Tuesday the 25th. We'll have that Couch Caddy class. Yeah, Izzy's going to check the date for me. So we're going to lift up our presser foot because this is pretty bulky and get that under there. But with the tissue paper behind, as we're trying to top stitch over this shelf liner, it won't grab. 25th is Tuesday. Perfect. Thank you. So, wow, I'm having a moment here. I'll be all right. Right with you, folks, as soon as I figure myself out. Okay. So we are going to put this underneath. We're almost done. We're top stitching and then we're done. And the only reason we're top stitching is really to seal that opening that we left for turning. And if you watched our dish mat, our decorated dish mat conversion, where we got a dish mat from Dollar Tree and sewed pretty fabric to one side and flipped it so that it was beautiful and kind of did a quilt as you go on that, we learned a turning technique where if your Orphan block was able to have an opening here, you could turn this through that opening. So if you want to sort of combine tutorials, you can go back and watch the dish drying mat tutorial and learn that method for turning through the front of something like this. Might be a combo tutorial awesomeness. All right, because I'm not putting a leader in here, I'm going to grab my thread, get myself started, a little back stitch. And you could do this with a decorative stitch too. It's pretty thick, so if you're using a decorative stitch, nice and slow and steady, otherwise you'll risk, you know, breaking a needle and all kinds of fun stuff. This, yes, like I do. This is another moment where a hump jumper might be helpful, or seam jumper, which has 2 thicknesses. I think I'm going to use the thicker side for this one. I'm just going to slide it in behind my presser foot to keep the presser foot level while I go on this corner, because otherwise my presser foot's going to sit at a dropped angle like that and just kind of get stuck and stitch in the same place instead of allowing me to continue down that side. See how it drops down back there? So we lift the presser foot, put the hump jumper in under. It holds the presser foot level, and then as it stitches, the feed dogs just push that hump jumper right out the back side. We have these at the shop too. If you don't have one in your stash of tools yet, it's a really big helper, not just for turning corners like this, but also for crossing over big thick seams. So there you go, put that there, and there we go. That tissue paper is keeping us from getting stuck on our shelf liner. The hump jumper is helping us turn the corners. I turn the corner with my needle in the down position so it keeps my spot. And we're almost done with our jar opener. There we go. A little bit of a back stitch to seal that. Turn my flywheel towards me and bring this out. Clip the threads. And of course, give your project a little haircut. I don't even know if I should ask. Are we back on overhead? You're just so fast. You just follow me wherever I go. It's wonderful. We love it when Izzy does cameras. All right. So now I've got tissue paper back here. And there are a couple of ways. If you just start tearing, you may leave little shreds. But if you're just gentle and you kind of pinch open the shelf liner like that and pull away, then the tissue paper comes out. The stitching stays in. And you didn't have to wrestle anything. So you just kind of pull. And if any little bits stay in your seam after you pull this out, a pair of tweezers, you can get in there and just grab the little bits of tissue paper. And then we'll get this inside out, pulled away. Anyway, kind of you can choose whether you're neat or kind of raccoonish in the way you, basically, however you open Christmas presents. You can be neat and careful, or you can tear. Yeah, that is true. I do. I always want to be patient, but I suffer under patience. Anyway. All right, so then we've got the tissue paper out. We've used up some scraps, and this shelf liner side, when you put it on top of a jar and grip, gives you good grip. We tested these out. You could make these different shapes for different seasons. Same process, whatever shape you wanted to use. You could make yourself a template. You could embroider onto this before you put it in the sandwich. You could quilt it onto the batting before you put it on the sandwich. You can use orphan blocks from other quilts. There's no limit on how big or small this has to be. We did test to make sure that when this finished at a 5-inch square, that it was still big enough to open a mayonnaise or peanut butter jar or pickle jar. So we did test that size. So I wouldn't go much smaller than a 6-inch starting square to make sure that you're going to have something that ends up big enough to open the jars. But we had some folks test these out in the classroom over the course of this week, and they were a successful jar opener. So that's our tutorial this week. We hope that you've enjoyed it. We hope that you enjoy all of the fun things that we do here on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, and of course in the shop in person is our favorite way to interact. We hope that you get the chance to come see us soon. We love seeing your smiling face. We love the hugs. We love the stories. We love the creativity. And we look forward to seeing you at Golden Anchor Quilting, where community is the fabric of our dreams.